Good morning, everybody. I hope y'all having an amazing day. Honestly, the sun is shining back here. As you can see, it's cold AF outside, but nevertheless, it's still a nice day. It's warm in here, so I'm kind of, I'm grateful for that. Um, so essentially today, what I want to talk about is kind of what I've been seeing, um, in where I live in Bridgeport, Connecticut. Just some of the things that I've noticed over the past year or so. Um, more increasingly more since I would say probably 2022, kind of like when we started coming out of that kind of COVID, 2021, 2022, when we started coming out of the COVID lockdowns. Um, and how I've noticed things have changed since before then. Um, and kind of how things are different and why I no longer see the same, you could say, society, shall I say, that I saw beforehand. When I was like 20 years old, 30 years old now. So kind of gonna compare like 10 years ago to today. Um, is it exactly? It's a whole decade. Essentially like, if you want to call it a generation. But yeah, essentially that's kind of what I'm getting at. And we're gonna go through what exactly I've seen change here in coastal Connecticut in terms of everything. I don't know if you guys maybe have seen similar changes where you live. This particularly pertains to the United States and to an extent Canada and Europe. Um, but yeah, let's get right into it. So as we've known, COVID lockdowns they ended, and people started kind of going back to their normal routine. Going back to work in person, going back out to bars, clubs, shopping, hanging out with friends, etc. But what we kind of noticed is that things are not the same that they were prior to the lockdowns. Essentially everything has changed. So what I've noticed is from when I used to go through Bridgeport, Connecticut, before the lockdowns. Kind of life kind of just went at this steady pace. It's a relatively impoverished city, so it's not exactly like you know a place like New York, maybe Manhattan. Let me just not generalize New York. Manhattan, for example, where you go to Midtown and you see lots of life, lots of excitement. You don't essentially see that in Bridgeport. It's pretty, you know, paced life. Like there's nothing special about it. But life moves. But it's just not what you'll see in a place like Manhattan or in a place like downtown LA or in Miami or downtown Chicago. It just doesn't have that. Like people aren't just excited to be there. It's just we just live essentially. So sorry, I'm like extremely like bothered by something. I don't know. But yeah, essentially, what had happened prior to COVID is that okay, life is just kind of moving at this kind of steady pace. Um, but now that when you go to the major areas in Bridgeport, Connecticut, it's completely different. I've noticed extreme amounts of poverty and homelessness, especially in the downtown areas. We have this center there. It's kind of like the main center of downtown. If you're from the area, you'll know it as McLeavy Green, or McLeavy Hall, whatever. It tends to be a big area where an extensive amount of people, usually people that are homeless, are people that are suffering from substance abuse, mental health problems. Many of them kind of congregate and hang out. There's also, to an extent, some gang activity and drug dealing activity there as well. But it's just mainly a place where a lot of people that are unhoused tend to congregate. And I've noticed that it has grown exponentially after COVID. And we also have this, of course, if you're from the East Coast, you're familiar with Interstate 95, which, of course, a high section of it runs through Bridgeport. And we have a neighborhood, the east side of Bridgeport. This actually happened after COVID. Up until this was actually discovered and went mainstream, actually went on local news, there was actually a massive homeless encampment with several dozen people who are actually living under the bridge in tents in essentially like a Los Angeles style homeless encampment. It kind of got a little bit of attention. It went on the news. The city cleaned it up. But unfortunately, the city really didn't do much more than kind of preserve their own reputation, I guess you could say. Many of the people are still unhoused. They were just pushed out of that encampment. So, Bridgeport is pretty notorious for having shortages in terms of its beds in homeless shelters. We don't really have the resources here to cater to the extensive poverty. Government statistics say, I've lived here my entire life almost. Now I live in a better area, of course, but I've lived in poverty. I've lived in poverty as a child. I've lived in this city in my entire life. I've hung out on the streets. I could tell you the truth a lot better than some of these politicians that are bagging $200,000 a year, and some of them don't even maintain a home in the city, and they're actually elected officials in the city. They say that about between 20 to 30%, give or take, of the population is living in poverty. But I can tell you it's significantly higher than that. It's likely above 40% of the population. Not to mention, that doesn't even include a lot of people who are kind of just getting by, like at the bare minimum. Like they make just enough money to kind of pay the bills and put a roof over their head. So essentially, if you really want to gauge like how many people are actually living like kind of in survival mode, it's likely well above 2/3 of the population here. And don't quote me on that, but I can, just from my personal experience, I can tell you that just because someone is owning a home, tax rates are very high on the properties, car taxes are extremely high, and not to mention every other expense that you have. And of course, we live in the NYC metro area; things are just extremely expensive. Essentially what is happening here is that things are just getting worse for people. I mean, people are struggling more and more and more. And, really, they're just getting by. I think that, to an extent, a lot of people rely on, like, kind of this community, depending on the specific community in general. Some people are just in straight survival mode. Some people kind of lean on family members and relatives, kind of group together to kind of just get by day to day. There's a lot of different scenarios that people kind of, turn to in order to kind of survive. But of course, I'm just letting you know, like, this has become increasingly more so since COVID has ended. So I'm just letting you know that things are getting a lot worse here, and they have changed. And whether or not the media wants to say one thing, or the politicians at state and federal level want to say another thing about how the American economy has never been better. You gotta remember, these people are out of touch. They're completely out of touch with how things are, at kind of like a base level. These are people that are well off, they're making good salaries. They just don't know how it is to be an average person in society. So, things that they say, just essentially take them, listen to them, and just push them one ear throughout the other, because they don't know how things are. If you're someone in the media, you're working at CNN and you're making, I don't know, $250,000 to $500,000 a year, maybe even more. What do you personally know about living at the bottom of society, making, $20,000, $30,000 a year? If you're somebody, that's got a disability and you can't work full time, or you can't afford to go to college, or you can't find a good job, or whatever the case is. Why are we taking advice from people that are living in a sheltered community, making all this money, and they think that they can tell us how the American economy is? So, again, do your own research and just take it like with a grain of salt, because these people really don't know how things are. They tell you what they want to tell you. They will tell you what they're told to tell you. So, again, don't listen to them. But, take it from somebody who actually is living in an area that can actually vouch for this and who has lived in these experiences. And not saying that maybe some of these people that are up there haven't lived in poverty one time in their life, but many of these people forget where they come from. And they act like they don't know what's going on. They act like they don't know what people are experiencing. And, you know, you really got to kind of, again, process every piece of information if, you know, how you get it. You can't just tune on to CNN or MSNBC or Fox News or whatever you watch and just say, okay, this guy says this is how things are. Because it's really not. I mean, you're hearing something that has gone through several people they check this information and make sure this is what they want to present to you as fact. And the real facts come from the real people who live these events every single day of their lives and actually are out there experiencing it, not from some pundit that's making, again, $500,000 a year, $1 million a year, and that's sitting behind a desk in a fancy building in Manhattan. So, again, but back to my main point, you know, things have changed since COVID, and things have changed dramatically. And, you know, this is just, you know, what I have witnessed in terms of the increased levels of poverty, addiction, and homelessness here in the largest city in Connecticut, in Bridgeport. And again, the income, the disparity in wealth in Connecticut is pretty extreme. So I live in Fairfield County, and we have, to the north, you have a city, Danbury. All the way to the west, near the border of New York, we have Greenwich, which is essentially considered like one of the wealthiest towns in Connecticut. And then we kind of end with Bridgeport, Stratford, which is like, you know, Bridgeport's being the largest city in Connecticut, and of course the largest city in Fairfield County, but we're right on the edge of New Haven County. But we are in Fairfield County, essentially. Okay, so what you have Bridgeport here, and then if you take like depending on the neighborhood you're in, you take like a 10-minute drive, and you end up in a town called Fairfield, which is like an it's like a middle class, upper middle class, has a pretty wealthy neighborhood as well. Well, actually, two of them, I guess you could say, two like really wealthy neighborhoods. So we have it's called Sasko Hill, and then we have Greenfield Hill. Those are like the two wealthier neighborhoods, and the rest of the town is like middle to upper middle class. It has a lower middle class area as well, but I mean, those people are, you know, it's a generally safe town, and it's a pretty good area. So, you know, side by side with Bridgeport, it's complete opposites. I mean, it's insane. It's insane. The wealth disparity. And then again, go one more town over to the west of Fairfield. We reach, well, actually, scratch that. There's a third neighborhood within Fairfield. I always forget this one. It's actually, you know, they kind of consider themselves a part of it, but like a separate part. But it's called Southport. Probably one of the wealthier of them, and it touches Westport, Connecticut. Westport, Connecticut, again, one of the wealthier towns in Connecticut. So, which is like a upper middle class to upper income town. So you have this town about essentially like a 15-minute drive, 10-15-minute drive, depending if you take the highway or not, from Bridgeport, and they're two worlds apart. And the populations of each one of these towns, it's just absolutely insane, like the difference in wealth. And it essentially goes this way all the way throughout the coast, because then you end up after Westport, you have Norwalk, which has some levels of extreme poverty pockets throughout the town, but it's becoming more and more gentrified over time, and there are some really good areas there. So it's like a smaller city. Then after Norwalk, you go to Darien. One of the former sundown town and one of the wealthiest towns in Connecticut. After that, Stamford's a big city as well. It used to be, I would say, used to have a lot of areas that were extremely poor, impoverished, full of crime, becoming very gentrified from people moving in from New York. There's still some very sketchy areas of the city, but essentially, it's getting a lot better. Then you go to Greenwich. Greenwich, as I mentioned earlier, extremely wealthy. It has a lower middle class area. I think it's called Riverside, if I'm not mistaken. But near like the border of Stanford, but the rest of the city, the town is extremely wealthy. I mean, this is a town where you'll go to the downtown and you'll find like a Gucci. I think there's Gucci, but Hermes and all these other extremely wealthy and high brand stores. So very wealthy town. A lot of multi-millionaires and billionaires live there, right on the border of New York State. So again, Fairfield County, extremely wealthy. Then you have some towns, upper towns like New Canaan, Ridgefield, Wilton, Weston, Easton. These are pretty wealthy towns as well. So again, the wealth disparities in the major cities, to an extent, Stanford and Norwalk, and the Danbury as well, which are becoming more and more gentrified. Then you have Bridgeport, which is starting to get a little bit gentrified in some parts, but it's lagging behind. It suffers from a lot of corruption. We have a mayor who's a convicted felon. Many of the city council members have pending felonies. Just a lot of corruption in general. Very, very mismanaged city. But you're starting to get a little bit on the coastal areas, a little bit of gentrification, some new developments, but it is lagging behind the rest of major redevelopments within the United States. But again, you can see those changes coming. Things have definitely changed there. But again, I have noticed, when you really look at the levels of increased poverty and homelessness, it is definitely getting drug addiction. It is getting worse. Sometimes I'll go to a place like McDonald's, and the parking lot will be full of people living in their cars or in RVs. This was not present at all before COVID. So this is becoming increasingly so, especially also places like Walmart, even in the neighboring town of Fairfield. There's actually people living in RVs and in their cars in places like the Whole Foods in the area. So there are increasing. You just got to pay attention. I'm somebody, I pay attention to a lot of things. I've always been kind of in a way, because of my past, I've been kind of always just been paranoid and always look out for everything. And I see exactly what's going on, and I just notice it all the time. It's big RVs lined up, and just people essentially living in there. Sometimes they'll put signs out, not to bother them, because it's they're living there. Sometimes because the police sometimes will bother people. Some of these businesses do not allow overnight stays, and sometimes they'll allow you to stay in the daytime but not overnight, or sometimes they don't want you there at all. So you really got to kind of figure out, I guess, if you're in that situation, where exactly you want to go and where you can stay. But of course, same thing applies to many of these large businesses that have these large parking lots. A lot of people are living in the parking lots, and it's a very unfortunate, sad situation. But it is, again, increasingly getting worse. And I've noticed a lot of them are either very young people or elderly people that are living in these situations. Even I've seen some children and elderly women. Sometimes they 60s, 70s, and even their 80s that are living in these situations. And it is becoming a significant problem. It's a problem that is not being addressed correctly. And I'm only giving you an example of where I live in Fairfield County. I mean, this is likely happening all over the country. But considering Fairfield County is one of the wealthier counties in the country, I really want to kind of break it down and just really explain it from that point of view. Because there's a lot of counties that, they just don't have the amount of the wealth differences, and they just don't have the amount of wealth as a county like Fairfield County. So I really want to give y'all the perspective of that, so you can kind of gauge and say, okay, well, we have all these wealthy towns, and you have a city or two or three that is okay, it's got a lot of poverty in it, but just see the difference. Oh well, sorry, I got something in my eye. But just a 10-15 minute drive, and you're in a whole different world with multi-million-dollar mansions. 15 minutes down the road, housing projects that are full of violence, drugs, crime, gang members. It's absolutely insane. And it's, again, this is a problem that is kind of just growing and growing and growing, and I think that the homelessness problem is becoming significantly worse. And with the prices of housing in our area, if you want to live in one of the more decent areas in Bridgeport, Connecticut, so we'll just use Bridgeport as an example. We have some new developments that came out. They have park buildings with like the pool and the gym and all that. You're looking about 2,000 to 2,100 for a studio. And not only do you have to have decent credit and you have to have good income, usually I think it's at 2.5, 3 times the rent. Of course, you have to have the down payment. It's just got to come up with $7,000 to $10,000. I mean, in cash, just to live in the more decent area of Bridgeport. And it's similar, and even in the worst areas. I run a small business and doing home improvement, and I work for a client, and this home is actually in one of the worst areas of the city. Not the worst area, but one of the worst areas of the city. And the apartment is a 2-bedroom. It's okay, 2-bedroom. It's going for $1,800 a month, which is it's still, I mean, in a bad area, $1,800 is still pretty pricey. I mean, it's very hard for families in that area to afford $1,200, let alone $1,800. And of course, they want credit checks. I mean, you're checking credit and income and adding extra fees for like pets. And this is an area that these people can barely afford, again, a fraction of the $1,800, let alone paying $1,800. So, just gauging, where we are. And then in the neighboring community in Fairfield, good luck finding an apartment. Like a real modernized apartment. A studio, you're looking at like $2,200, $2,200, a little higher than Bridgeport. And then once you go to like the 1-2 bedrooms, you're pushing all the way up to probably past $3,000 a month. You could find like an older home in like a decent area, like one of the lower, even though it's not lower, but like one of the border homes that kind of borders the city of Bridgeport. You can find an apartment there, maybe like a 1-bedroom for like $1,800. But it's still, I mean, it's pretty high. I mean, and then again, you got to pay the utilities and all the other expenses that I previously mentioned. So I think that it's just very difficult for people to be able to afford these prices, especially in today's society. I mean, inflation wrecked us for a while. Even though it's gone down, it's still persistent. And again, incomes have not gone up. It's very difficult to find a job. Most people that I live with in community in Bridgeport, there's a lot of immigrants here. They're struggling to find jobs. Right now, like gig work is usually like the easiest way to go. Very oversaturated market as well. It's very difficult for people to come here and find jobs. And unfortunately, it's just very sad, but most of the kind of available jobs, if you do or don't have a college degree, are in like the criminal justice system. So we're never short. We always need lawyers and police officers, corrections officers, because we have a jail here in Bridgeport. Social workers, like state workers, the DCF workers. There's always kind of like this foster care, criminal justice system jobs that are that's it. And then of course you have your retail and fast food, but even they aren't hiring as much as they used to be. And of course, it's made a lot of people turn to having to create their own kind of business, which has oversaturated the like home improvement and cleaning businesses, all of like these kind of small like car washing businesses, anything you can kind of start at home. Everybody's trying to do a side hustle and start a business because there's no other way to make money. So it's becoming very desperate here, and again, there's really the American dream in Bridgeport, Connecticut is essentially on the way out, but it is almost to the end. It's becoming more and more impossible to survive, let alone ever think about buying a home. Just a starter home in one of the iffy neighborhoods is like $400,000. So it in many homes in Bridgeport are multifamily homes as well, which makes it harder because the market isn't really, there's not really many single family homes, and if there are, they are actually located in two areas. The most luxurious neighborhood of Bridgeport, Black Rock, it's likely out of reach for most people. You're pushing well over $500,000 for a small starter home. And then we have the north side of Bridgeport, north end of Bridgeport, but it's located near a university, and many of these rich landlords have bought out the homes to rent out to college students, and they've literally taken over the market. So, yeah, I mean, essentially, it's there's nowhere to go, and the neighboring communities well over, the prices are just astronomical. I mean, in Fairfield, for example, alone, houses are pushing towards $1 million for a starter home. There's some cheaper options, cheap meaning still probably over about $500,000 for a starter home in places like Stratford and Trumbull, but again, it's pushing many people 30, 45 minutes out of the area to, if they even want to start a home. And you gotta forget New York. I mean, Long Island, New York State, New York City, Massachusetts, forget it. It's even worse there than it is here in terms of price. So again, I'm just kind of laying down what I've seen. Things are definitely getting a lot worse, and it's becoming more unaffordable, and it's just essentially nowhere left to go because we're kind of squeezed. I went to college. I did what essentially I was told to do: go to college, get a good job. Unfortunately, here we are, and it's become impossible. I mean, I've applied for, I think, over 150 jobs in the past year and a half. Just Indeed and LinkedIn. And there's another thing I use, but I don't even remember the name of it. Barely used it because a lot of it's got scams on it. And I've actually applied for jobs that have been scams, so I've fallen to that. Luckily, I didn't give them any information, but I have actually applied to jobs that ended up being scams. But yeah, I mean, I actually worked for a short time. The only job out of all of these jobs that I've applied for, I've gotten 3 interviews. And I worked one job, which was, I worked as an Amazon driver. This was 2 years ago. I worked with a college degree, working as an Amazon driver. And this was off time during my business, my home improvement landscaping business, because, winter, things kind of slow, and, you gotta need some extra money. Worked there for first month or two. I was getting good hours, and after that they just kind of said, we don't have that many hours, we got a day or two a week for you. And I ended up having to quit because I can't live off 10 hours, 20 hours a week. It's just not possible. And then I got 3 other interviews. 2 of them didn't make it past the first round. Other one got to the second round, and they ended up going with someone else. So, and none of them were really good. The highest paying one was like $32 an hour, and $32 an hour in Fairfield County is like chump change. So, essentially, no one else has ever, all these jobs. Sometimes you'll see that they look at the application, and I'm assuming they just throw it out. I don't know what they do with them. Yeah, I mean, you go to college, and then it's like, oh, well, now you graduated with a bachelor's degree, and it's like, well, that's not good enough. Now you got to go get a master's degree. And then by the time I finish, if I was to go to graduate school, then they'll be like, oh, well, that's not good enough anymore. You need a PhD. Because it's like, where does it end, And essentially, it's just like, we work so hard, and we do all this stuff in life, and we do everything right sometimes, and it's never enough. And I guess it's gotten worse because of COVID. Well, it's not really because of COVID. It's because of the effects, how the government mismanaged the economy during COVID and after COVID. So, yeah, I guess I should clarify that. But, yeah, essentially, I know there's a lot of y'all are probably in the same predicament, same position. Everyone's probably experiencing their own troubles. I'm just kind of grateful at this point that I've tried to save as much money as possible, kind of have like a cushion in case an emergency happens. But again, I've checked out mentally. I've checked out of this situation here in this country. And I'm sure most Americans are. I mean, there's those studies that there was recently a study amongst the women in the United States that a third of women in the United States would leave if they had the economic resources to do so. So, I mean, I think that we're all checked out in a sense. As long as you're part of like you're not part of like the top 10-15% of Americans, because those are the ones that are really basking in glory right now. The rest of us, the bottom 85%, we're just like, we're done. Maybe some of us are still on it. I know there's people that are like patriotic and they're just like, America, and they're kind of just like, we're the greatest country in the world. I think we're long past that in terms economically speaking. But everyone has their own opinions, their own beliefs, and everyone can feel the way they want to feel. So, but I'm just kind of going through the motions and kind of breaking everything down just so everyone can kind of see how things are where I live. And will things change? Again, I try to be an optimist, but it's hard to, again, seeing what I see here, Connecticut, very hard to kind of just say, yeah, things are going to change, they're going to get better, things are going to be like they were for workers in the 1950s, like we're all going to have jobs and pensions. It's I don't think that's ever going to come back. I think that's done. I think the American dream at this point is to just get out of the United States. To go where, well, that's up to you to do your own research, but I don't think that the American dream is ever coming back in the sense of what we experienced post-World War II. I mean, maybe you have a different opinion, but after studying this for a decade, I don't see that we're ever going back. I just think that the politicians are just so far down the road of incompetency that I just don't think that we're coming back from that. But essentially, I'm just here to give y'all a little bit of knowledge on what I see. And I hope other people do the same. It'd be great to hear from other people in other cities and counties around the country and what they're experiencing, because I know things are tough here in Connecticut, but I'm sure things are just as bad or even maybe worse in places like maybe in the Deep South, or maybe in California where it's extremely expensive, or in New York, in state and city, in Massachusetts, and whatnot. So, sorry. It's just crazy to think that things are like this are happening, but again, I'd always be interested in hearing other people's stories, other people's comments, concerns, whatnot. So, yeah, I mean, essentially, things have definitely changed here in Fairfield County, in Connecticut, and things have changed in my city, and I just don't see things getting any better. Not to mention the infrastructure. It's been crumbling. We have potholes everywhere. Sometimes we have signal lights that don't even work. Signs that get knocked out by like drunk drivers or distracted drivers, and they hit the signs, and they sometimes will just lay on the ground like the stop signs for weeks before they even get touched. There's a lot of things I've noticed they're kind of just not getting touched at all. Sometimes you'll see like grass overgrowing in some of like the municipal areas, like they kind of cut back on doing landscaping in the summer. A lot of cuts. You can see them. They're small, but they add up over time. Yep. So essentially, that's what I kind of wanted to leave y'all for today. It's like always. It's always great to really kind of explain things and give other people some insights and just kind of share my experiences here. And I hope if everyone else out there has the same experiences that it's going on in their area, of course, always you can share them with me, share them with other people. It'd be great to hear them. But as always, y'all take care, and I will see y'all later.